Hi, I'm attorney John Mangan, a board-certified lawyer in the area of wills, trusts, and estates in the state of Florida. And today I want to address a common question that we receive from many of our clients and potential clients, and that is, why would you put a house in trust? Well, let's sort of peel back the layers on that first and talk about whether putting a house in trust is the right approach, because it really depends upon the circumstances and the factors present in any individual client's life. So before we can answer the question about why do we put a house in trust, we need to be aware of certain factors that are present with any client or potential client so that we can determine whether it's even a wise idea to be considering putting the property in trust. The first thing we want to look at is the property in question a primary resident for the owner here in the state of Florida? And if it is it considered homestead property? Now, many people are familiar with the property tax exemption that they receive on their taxes here in the state of Florida. But the filing for that exemption in and of itself is not necessarily determinative of whether we're dealing with constitutional homestead property. I know that can get a little bit confusing, but just understand whether you filed or not filed for the tax exemption on homestead in Florida, that doesn't necessarily give us the answer that we're looking for. So we want to look and see, is this a primary residence of somebody that's living in Florida? If so, then we need to look at the constitutional definition of homestead. Specifically, if the property is located inside of a municipality, so inside of a city, then is it 1/2 acre or less? If it's more, then that exceeds the limits. But if it's less or equal to 1/2 acre, then we satisfy the definition. If we are outside a municipality, and often, certainly in rural areas, areas that are governed by county and not necessarily a city, then we're limited on up to 160 acres, so much larger size available. Most people will tend to fit that definition, although not everyone if they own a farm, for example. So if we have met those acreage limitations, now we need to look and see, is the client married or does the client have minor children? If the answer to either one of those questions is yes, then we have some very restrictive Florida laws that in all likelihood will suggest it's not a good idea to put the property into a trust. So why would someone want to consider transferring their property into a trust? The primary motivation for most people that look at this is to avoid probate. Probate, if you're not familiar with that term, is the formal legal settlement of an estate after someone passes away. And if they die owning property in their own name, then that property will have to go through probate unless some other sort of planning has been done. And one of those options, of course, is the use of a trust. Because if the property is in the trust when someone passes, then it will avoid probate. This can work really well when a client has non-homestead real property here in the state of Florida. It can also work well if we're dealing with homestead property here in Florida, especially where the client is perhaps elderly or older, they're single, no minor children, and asset protection is not a particularly strong motivator of theirs. If really they're just trying to avoid probate, then even in that scenario for homestead property, this can work really well. Now, here's the caveat. For someone that is concerned about asset protection, there is a court case on record here in the state of Florida. Now, before I go into the details of it, understand that we have had conflicting rulings come out of neighboring jurisdictions, but this particular case has not been overruled, which is why I mention it. This particular case did not extend the very strong asset protection that an individual receives during life while owning homestead property to that same property after it's been transferred over into a trust. So if we have somebody that is concerned about asset protection during their life, then we may want to think twice about whether we transfer that homestead property into a trust. Because understand there are other alternative options for avoiding probate besides putting the property into a trust. So as you can see, the question about whether to put property into a trust, it's not a simple one. There are a lot of factors to consider. So please, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're here to help.